Thank you. My name's Greenaway, Director of Greenaway Architects, and we're going to showcase the Warren and Mahoney Melbourne Studio today. Important to acknowledge that the project is located on the unceded sovereign lands of the Kulin Nation. We certainly pay respect to Wurundjeri people for being the custodians of country for millennia. This project brings together a unique offering in terms of this notion of tricultural design. So what it's doing, it's located within a colonial building. But what we've actually done is we've brought together two First Nations perspectives to unify to a collective and cohesive design strategy, bringing the Maori antecedents of the practice from New Zealand and Indigenous sensibility in terms of design thinking. This is the integrated response, but counterposing it against the colonial artifice of a Gothic building in which it's located within. Importantly for us, the collaborative model is really key. So we collaborate a lot with Warren and Mahoney, so it made a lot of sense to speak to this notion of creative compression, which is essentially a methodology of how one comes together, how one shares knowledge, how we start to coalesce different ways of thinking in a unified proposition. And so for us, this is really the essence of what this space is all about and how it's manifested through the architectural and interior expression. And so the way in which we've done this is we've carefully calibrated a unique sort of journey line, or creating a new song line of country embedded within the interior experience, supported by choreographing and through a series of mnemonic markers being the existing columns within this original warm shell, to create a bi-directional interface where we come together and coalesce within the interior experience of this important gathering space. And what it also speaks to is the layers of cultural meaning and connection to country fused together through the material, colour, texture, tactility of the interior experience. And to us that becomes a really important motif which reinforces the design ideas. And so this notion of coming together and bringing an Indigenous and a Maori perspective is explored both in plan and in section in terms of how we start to come together and coalesce and start to look at these notions of how we start to fuse together different ways of thinking but different material cultures, practice and tradition. And so the radical centre really is the beating heart of an architectural practice. This is where we come together, we engage with clients, with consultants, with the team. This is where all the work happens. This is the brains trust, but importantly too, it sets the tone and the conditions and the behaviours of how we engage and express ourselves architecturally. And so this creative focal point is certainly key, because what we're doing here is we're bringing in the colours of country. We're evoking history and memory of place. We're referencing and facilitating light access, ventilation, but also that informality of how we start to do our pin-ups, how we exchange, how we develop material palettes when we're doing interiors. But importantly, it's anchored in that level of cultural respect. And I'll pass you on to Marianne.
Thanks, Chifa. Hi everyone, Marianne here from Warren and Mahoney Architects. At the core of our design is our people strategy. We took a pulse survey with our team at the inception and extracted a conceptual framework which was informed by a spectrum of workplace etiquettes. So this really gave rise to our framework. We call these spaces showtime, playtime, airtime, face time and my time. In mapping these out, there was a natural alignment to our cultural narrative. The arrival experience really sets the tone for us. So when you come into our studio, you're in our showtime. This is a place for us to come and gather as a unit. This is a place for us to entertain and host guests. It's a place where we come together. You're also greeted by these beautiful columns, hand-painted, inscribed with motifs from Māori and First Nations culture. These act as wayfinding markers. They're illuminated, they naturally draw you into our central space. Playtime. This is our space where we can get messy. This is our creative lab. We've got lots of pin-up walls, large gathering tables, a huge screen. This is also where the fusion of the two Indigenous cultures is really amplified. And of course, on the other end, we've got focus rooms, quiet zones, places of retreat, places for respite. There was an acknowledgement that there is a need for my time in the contemporary workplace for more private and concentrated work. The central space, of course, as Jifa mentioned, this is our studio's grandest statement. This is our jewel. This is the space that we are so proud of. It's our creative anchor, that main point of convergence. It's the intersection of our art, of our design work, of our people, and culture as a practice. And it really acknowledges our heritage as a practice from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and now embedding here on country. He whakararu. The space is encoded with deep meaning. The linings around the space is heavily etched with this passion, and this talks about breaking barriers. It talks about dualism. You'll see the two vertical lines that stretch between the roof plane and the ground plane symbolically, and these are very important markers and important threshold marking for both First Nations and the Māori culture. We've got the same motif etched into other areas with acoustic panels. They're very similar variations to our hand-painted columns, and even onto the glazed partitions as decals. So design is really in the detail. It's multi-scalar, it's different applications, but it's always a unique reference to our cultural story. There are, of course, moments for deep reflection. There's a subtlety in the design. The geometric acoustic panels that you see here in the background, they're actually referencing Indigenous art forms. It's simple. It's the beautiful tactility, the neutral tones to allow for the other cultural signifiers to really be highlighted around the space and still allow for spaces for stillness and calmness. It's multi-layered in both a pragmatic and a conceptual sense. You've got the neo-gothic arched windows in the background, which delineates that colonial layer. On the foreground, you've got the insertion of the contemporary work settings. In terms of our materiality, there's a lot of native timber, deep green hues that evoke a sense of country. And we really think and we really believe that there's a sense of modesty and honesty and clarity in the design approach. Caring for country. Caring for country and the natural environment, I mean, this is embedded in all that we do as architects. So we were trying to be really reductive in our approach. We use as much natural material as we possible and use as much of the existing warm shell, particularly given we've got really tight budget constraints. And a lot of the decision making were informed by measuring different levels of sustainability. So it was essentially about minimising our intervention and reinforcing the clarity in our cultural thinking, which is really expressed in the humbleness of the design.
So this idea of cultural authenticity is at the key. What we're really seeking to do here, and it's never been done before, where an Indigenous architect, a Maori architects come together within a colonial setting to create and reconfigure this understanding of culture embedded within the built and natural environment. It provides these timeless reminders of the deep connection of 67,000 years of continuous connection and starting to coalesce that to develop a new language of architecture in terms of how we think about the opportunity to encode meaning in all that we do. It's frugal, it's clear, it's legible, and there's a certain honesty in terms of the expression.